good morning, and welcome to Chalk Talk. Hello, hello, hello. I am your host, Kim Davis. Welcome, and I am super excited to be with you, and it's super excited about today's show. Today is Tuesday, November 29th. I hope that all of you had a safe and healthy and filling, whatever that means for you, Thanksgiving holiday. I hope you got a chance to spend it with people you like and love, family, friends, whoever that is for you, but you got a chance to enjoy some time and that you took a moment to remember what you were grateful for. So I hope you had a great Thanksgiving holiday weekend, and that you are ready for the rest of this holiday season as we approach Christmas. And my reminder and encouragement to you is just don't let it overwhelm you, right? Keep people first, and and yourself. So welcome to Chalk Talk. There's a lot to get to on today's show. I am incredibly excited about the guest that's joining us. If he's been here before, it's been a while. He is a colleague, and he's a friend, and he's an author. He's a professional he's a sports journalist, and he's been in the game about 35 years, and he's written for publications all over the country. And he has a great perspective, and he's got a really cool new book. And so I'm really excited to have him join us in today's show. But before we get to David, who's going to join us shortly, and I am going to talk a little bit about the Houston Texans and what's happening over on Kirby. I think it's important that I share a perspective about the narrative that is being created about Lovie Smith and what they're doing. So we'll get to that. A lot to get to on today's show, and obviously your questions and comments along the way. So this show is possible because we've got great supporters and great sponsors, and one for this show is the World Youth Foundation, and we are partnering with the World Youth Foundation, supporting an upcoming walk here in Houston. It is the African American Male Wellness Agency Walk. It's going to take place in April 15th of 2023, and leading up to that walk, we're going to have a lot of conversations about wellness for Black men. We're going to offer some opportunities for Black men to have conversations with each other, to be able to talk about and to support Black men in this health and wellness journey, which is about more than just obviously the physical health. That's huge. That's huge. And let me just share with you a little bit about why it's so huge, right? On average, Black men die 12 years earlier than their white counterparts due to preventable diseases, right? That's the crux of it right there for me. The African American Male Wellness Walk is a 5K walk and run. I mentioned it's going to be in April. It's going to be here in Houston. It's been going on in Ohio for, I think, maybe 15 years. They've partnered with Pastor Jay in Houston, Pastor Jamal Johnson of the Word Church, the 100 Black Men of Houston. Mayor Sylvester Turner is an honorary co-chair. So, it's just going to be a fun time. It's going to start at Emancipation Park and go through Third Ward and come back. So it is designed to raise awareness on these health disparities and provide free health screenings for things like blood pressure, glucose, cholesterol, HIV, STD, STI, and prostate cancer, so that Black men can know their numbers and increase their life expectancy. So I'm excited to partner with the World Youth Foundation to help spread the word about this walk, and not just the walk, but the work, because it's got to be ongoing and it's got to be continuous. And I'm inviting you to join us as well. There'll be opportunities between now and April for you to participate in this work, and definitely when registrations open, I'm going to encourage you to register to walk with us on April the 15th. So the World Youth Foundation is helping to bring this work to Chalk Talk in our audience, and also in a broader sense to the Houston community. All right. Speaking of other people that we know have been doing great work, our partners from I Love Jinka. If you did not see the Localist story, I think I put it in the video. I'll pin it again in the comments today, that ran last week on ABC 13. It was a great story. And if you're wondering who exactly are these people that we see here on the show, they've been on the show sometimes. We've heard about Jinka and the great the great product that it is, check out the Local-ish story. It's running, you can go to the ABC 13 website and catch it. It's run in Chicago and New York, and it's getting great reception. So if you happen to be in the Houston area and you're like, okay, I've seen it, couple things I'm going to ask you to do. Go to your HEB, and if your HEB doesn't carry it, talk to the store manager. Or if they're out because it sells out quickly, talk to the store manager and say, hey, this is a product that I like. Can you get it in the warehouse? Having it in the warehouse allows I Love Jinka and its founders and creators to scale and have it there in abundance, if you will, and not have just the every week that it sells out. So talk to the store manager. The store managers want to hear from customers and say, hey, you know what? I like this product. Can you get it in a way that it doesn't run out? Can you get it in your warehouse? And this is where you'll find it when you go to HEB.
Here at HEB, in the Healthy Living Department of Probiotics, you can find Jinka 7 days a week.
Yeah. Look at that Jinka sale. Look at that Jinka.
It is also that time of year. Well, actually, you know what? It's always a time for Kimmy treats, but especially as we approach the holidays. If you're looking for great gifts for colleagues or friends, family, things that ship well, that you can support them with, things that are good for them and to them, go to Kimmy Treats. Check out the website. The popcorn, the vegan popcorn, the subscription box will be launched shortly, hopefully by the time we have our next show. We are launching a subscription box for the holidays and hopefully beyond, where you can order a subscription for a client or a friend or a family member, and they will just get this box of popcorn every month. You won't even have to think about it. That is coming up. But right now you can go onto the website and you can order your popcorn. You can order your body butter and also great gifts. But it's also just good for you and it's good for your skin. And here are the options for what you can get when you go to KimmyTreats.com. All right, KimmyTreats.com. Don't forget to check it out. So while we wait for David to join us, I started the show a little early today because once a month I have these meetings with the group that's putting on the African American Male Wellness Walk. The guys from the organizers who started this effort out of Ohio are in town, and so I try to make sure that I can make those meetings in person on the once a month on Tuesdays. It just happens to be right around the time the show ends. But I wanted to make sure that we had some time today. Although I am always trying to get out of here in 45 minutes, that's my goal, that we have time to really have a great conversation with David and to allow the conversation to breathe. It's going to be exciting. This is the book that we're going to talk about. It Was Always a Choice. Picking up the baton of athlete activism. So I am excited about the book. You see, I have my little markers of different things that I'm about. It's great work, and I think that you're going to enjoy it. But before we do that, I want to talk a little bit about the Houston Texans, who are now 1-9-1. Okay, let me start by saying I am well aware that this Houston Texans organization, that this team, that they're not playing well. Like it's not good. What we see from this team week in, week out has not been good. So there's no excuses about that. And we can all sit back and say we'd like to see some things done differently from a coaching perspective, and many people are fans and local media, more radio, I'm going to say, that have really been hard. And not just hard. I think it's okay as a journalist to be hard on a coach, but when you are unnecessarily harsh, I think that takes it to another level. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit later in the show. David is joining us, so I don't want to waste our time that we have with David, but I do want to talk about it. Let me just say this before I bring David in. the Houston Texans and the McNair family, especially Cal McNair, for years have wanted to do things the Patriots way. And what I want people to understand is that that is exactly what they are doing. The Patriots way is kind of in your face. You know, I'm aggressive. I'm not really going to give you answers. That's not really Lovie Smith's way. That's the Patriots way, and that's what this organization is. The difference is the Texans don't have the receipts that the Patriots had. It didn't make it any more palatable that that's how they act in New England. But it does to make you say, well, you know, they are winning championships. And I would say this: the Patriots way should probably more likely be called Tom Brady's way, because the Patriots way is not quite what it was since Tom Brady and Belichick have split. But we'll talk about that later. I am super excited to welcome my guest now, my longtime friend, David Steele, to the show. David, thank you for joining me. It's great to see you.
It's great to see you, and thanks so much for having me on.
Well, I am so excited. Thanks for my book. I got my little markers in it that I want to talk to you about. And first of all, congratulations on the book and the work.
Thank you very much. It's still pretty stunning to me that I was able to pull together another book after help co-authoring Silent Gesture. Thank you. You had me on to talk about that before. It's sort of a representation that the story continues from what we're talking about all the way up to today.
So, David, before we talk specifically about the book, this has been you found your place, right? Because as you mentioned, you've written about these kind of stories. You wrote Silent Gesture before. And so what is it about this work that has stuck with you and made you want to continue to tell these stories?
Well, I think that having the opportunity to do Silent Gesture and to work with Tommy Smith sort of propelled everything forward from where I was. But I kind of felt like everything that I really cared about as I moved along as a sports journalist kind of put me in the position to be able to do it. It's always been just part of me, and one of the things that I cared about above all the others is, much as I've been a sports fan and have loved to have been part of the sports journalism world, and much as I wanted to do that ever since a pretty young age, I always wanted to do more than just write about the games, write about who won and who lost, and who got fired, who got drafted, who got recruited to this place or that place. I always wanted to sort of be engaged with so many of the other stories on as one part of it, but also all the injustices that were really obvious to me. Even going back to when I was a kid, when you're growing up and you're a sports fan, and you're always reading about Jackie Robinson, and you're growing up and you're seeing everything that people put Hank Aaron through. He was chasing Babe Ruth's record. You see, you fall in love with the NFL and college football, and yet it's impossible to ignore that there are no coaches, no black coaches, no black quarterbacks. That sort of thing sticks with you, and you realize at a certain point that you can't just spend your life putting that to the side and saying that's not important. The games are the only thing that's important. I've always believed that people's lives are much, much more important than that, and that was kind of where it started. And I've been really lucky to be in a position to continue to pursue that and have an opportunity to keep pursuing that.
Well, I appreciate the fact that you have pursued it. It's probably one of the reasons that we have been friends for so long, because we feel that same kind of passion about these stories and the necessity to tell the stories. And, I think we've talked about it before. I too love talking about the X's and O's, but all of the things around sports, the business of sports, if you will, and the stories beyond the field, it's really a microcosm of society. Like, we see it in sports, but it represents what happens everywhere else. And I think that's the thing that probably drew me to sports so much, even beyond just the X's and O's. It's real life stuff. And so I love it. I love the name of the book. It was always a choice. And I want to kind of go through some of the chapters. I actually made notes in all the chapters. But is there any, before I do that, is there anything that what's the main thing you wanted people to know or take away from this book?
I honestly, and I'm not saying this as any kind of a shortcut or anything. I think the title really encapsulates it really well. And I have to give credit to the editors and publicity people and marketing people at Temple University Press. They're the ones who had also published Silent Gesture. They're the ones who sort of steered me in the direction of that title because they sort of realized that it sort of encapsulated the central theme, which was that everybody who has stepped forward and used their platform and used their voice and used their visibility to make change, and even if it was at a tremendous sacrifice to their career, their lives, their safety, and whatever, they did it willingly. They made a choice. They said, I could just be a player, which would be great, but I've decided to make the choice to be something bigger and to take advantage of the opportunity I have to speak up. While at the same time, so many others of us who have had that same opportunity have willingly and purposely chosen not to take advantage of that. They've stayed silent. They've taken the side of the status quo. They've decided not to ruffle anyone's feathers or rock anyone's boat. And for every great thing that they've done, and there's a chapter devoted to the biggest figures who have decided to do that. That's part of their legacy as well. That's how a big part of how they're going to be remembered forever, by the fact that they played and acted and performed at the same time as some of the great heroic civil rights and human rights figures this country and this world has ever seen. And they said, no, I don't want any part of that. I just want to play. I want to be left alone. I don't want to really change anything. I'm doing fine as it is, no matter how badly everybody else is doing it, no matter how much power I actually have. I've made a choice not to use it.
And I think that's what's great about it, because like you said, it is a choice, right? So I like the way you started in just even the introduction, talking about Paul Robeson, like taking us all the way back. And so it kind of gives me chills, because I just, being kind of a history buff, that's a figure and a person that is like, yeah, let's start talking about Paul Robeson, because it goes even beyond him as a player. What made you start with him? And what made you start with Robeson?
I feel kind of funny about that part of the book, because in a way I kind of backed into it. I'll give you a little story about the origin of the book itself, and I touched on it a little bit during the course of the book. I had written in 2018, while I was still working for the Sporting News, a 50th anniversary story about the 1968 Olympic protest with Tommy Smith and John Carlos, to sort of saying, where does the movement stand today? Who's really being active, and why are these people making these choices, and how far have we come? And a lot of those centered around Colin Kaepernick, obviously, and that again goes into why he's based on the cover of the book. And he was still in the middle of his big battle back at the time that he was doing that. The people that I spoke to for that story brought up Paul Robeson pretty frequently. So I said, well, obviously he's going to be part of the book once I get started. But in the interim time, in the couple of years in between, I just happened to come across a quote from Paul Robeson, specifically, and it's in that chapter you speak of, about artists and performers and people in the spotlight, having to make a choice about how they're going to use their moment in the spotlight. He said, as an artist and a performer, we do not have a choice, but I have made my choice, and this is the choice I'm making. And then the context of when he said it sort of stands out as well, obviously, because he took himself from being just a singer, just a performer, just an actor, to being a voice on the world stage for human rights, civil rights, and against fascism. And again, this is stuff that was going on 80 years ago, and we're having those same discussions right now. And Paul Robeson really encapsulated it really well. And this is after he had moved away from sports, because the obvious blatant racism of sports had really kind of driven him away from it. There was no future in it for him back in the early parts of the 20th century, because of the brutal way that he was treated. But he was able to take it onto another stage to make his voice heard there.
So I think it was really cool how you talked about when you of course you explained what Colin Kaepernick is a face on it, right? Because he's like the contemporary face of what we talk about when it's whether or not you pick up this baton. But when you talk about his spiritual predecessors, right? So we know about Tommy Smith and John Carlos. You obviously have written about them and have chronicled what they've done for years. But there's so many others. I mean, you also talked about Craig Hodges and Mahmoud Abdul Rauf. I mean, and all of the people that came before. I mean, obviously we know about Jackie Robinson. There's so many others, and I just thought it was great. I mean, we know the work of Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. I think that chapter is just a great reminder of the spiritual predecessors. And although he started this work kind of on his own, by himself, of course, his teammate Eric Reed was there, but he didn't maybe have some of the same kind of support. But I do think it's interesting how you chronicled his relationship with Harry Edwards, who I don't think many people realize he had. He was often criticized, Colin Kaepernick, for not talking to anybody and getting any kind of input or mentorship. But from your book, we learned that that's not necessarily accurate.
Yeah, and that was one of the reasons I was sort of pushed forward to do both the original article, to sort of continue to watch how his choices and his decisions within the movement and where it was going, why it was so worthwhile. Specifically because so many people were there's so many conclusions about where it came from with Colin, where he intended to go with it, whether it had any sort of validity or authenticity. Most people, because, again, I kind of addressed this in the book as well, in the moment, there are always so many assumptions that, these guys just want attention. They don't know what they're talking about. They're just a bunch of dumb jocks. They're not equipped for this. And we come to find out through the course of time, they're very well equipped for it. And Colin, sort of took the teachings and the lessons from Harry Edwards while Harry Edwards was an advisor with the 49ers right there in the Bay Area, where he took it to heart. He went to him for counseling. Harry was very open with him, and Colin was very open in listening. And when the others in the movement's historical record went to reach out to him to get a sense of how he felt and where he needed to go next, like Tommy Smith did and John Carlos did and so many others, he embraced that as well. And they wanted to make sure that he was on the right track. So, I found out just in sort of trying to pulling together all the threads for this, that all these things matter to them, that they want to, that they want to continue the work that others had done before them. And it's really they found it really gratifying to know that there had been so many others before that maybe they weren't even aware of as much as they thought they were. They weren't as knowledgeable or as educated on, but they were willing to be educated about it. And that's where Harry Edwards fits in, and so many of the others who came in the 30 or 40 years before. And they were influenced by the people before them, by what Jackie Robinson did and Joe Louis did and Jack Johnson did and Bill Russell and Kareem and Ali and what all those people did. So they cared more about history than I think, more so than the general public really gave them credit for. And that was one of the things I felt needed correcting by doing this book.
Yeah, I was glad to read that. I mean, I have a tremendous amount of respect for Harry Edwards. In some of our earlier NABJ days, we used to sit around and be able to chat with him, and just a wealth of information, and to be able to just kind of sit at his feet, if you will, because he's been doing the work for so long, and he's got agency and the ability to do the work, which so many people don't have, or actually don't realize they have, right? I think that becomes a bigger issue. They don't realize they have. You mentioned Jack Johnson, and I think about this a part in the chapter. You talk about your presence as an act of protest. I will say I often feel that when I show up, my presence is an act of protest just by simply being there. So I got that. And so you wrote about something from Ken Burns's documentary Unforgivable Blackness, and something that Jeffrey Ward drew from W.E.B. Du Bois that he penned back in 1914. And he talked about boxing has fallen into disfavor, into very great disfavor. To see publications like the New York Times roll their eyes in shivery horror at the news from Paris to which you're compelled to give a front page makes one realize the depths to which we had fallen. The cause is clear. Jack Johnson had outsparred an Irishman. So it goes on to talk about that fight and that time. And at the very end, it says, wherefore we conclude that at the present prize fighting is very, very immoral, and that we must rely on football and war for pastime until Mr. Johnson retires or permits himself to be knocked out. So they didn't, like, we're just going to forget about boxing until this dude is gone. And I don't know if people really realize that if you follow boxing, like that, Jack Johnson was a real deal, and they were not happy with him knocking out the Irishman.
Yeah, it was learning about that, and I remember very vividly, and it's always just such when you're doing this, both as a journalist and as a sports fan, you know, the things you collect over the course of your life, as a follower of sports. And I remember really, really clearly when Ken Burns' documentary Undefeated came out, and it was such a riveting title. And when they explained it during the course of the documentary, and the written the company is explain exactly what the root of that what that phrase was, and where it came from, and why W.E.B. Du Bois said it, and think about when we talk about, hey, should sports and politics ever mix? Should sports and society ever, you know, can't sports be an escape from society? That's a reminder that if somebody of the stature and magnitude of W.E.B. Du Bois has something valid and important and meaningful to say about Jack Johnson, the heavyweight boxing champion of the world, then we should listen. And we should take it very seriously. And if he's saying...
It means something, right? It means something.
It means a whole lot. It's like, if he's saying that that's a microcosm of what Black people are doing and living in the conditions that they're subjected to in life, and you can if you can visualize it through a boxing match, and that Blackness in this country is unforgivable, then you can't just shrug that off and just say, oh, he should, you know, stay in his lane or something like that. And that, you know, that was one of the things why I wanted to illustrate what a lot of these athletes who, you know, you don't necessarily remember them for their outspokenness or what you would consider their bold stances. You know, they never, you know, did things like protest, you know, during the Olympics, or raise their fist, or do any boycotts, or take a knee, or anything like that. All they did was show up, be outstanding, be the best, make sure their presence was felt everywhere that they were told their presence should not even be. That moved the fight and the progress forward. That moved the battle lines forward. So Jack Johnson did that just by living his life and by being who he was, very, you know, very uncompromisingly. Jackie Robinson did the same thing. Bill Lewis did the same thing. Jesse Owens did the same thing. And just several generations of sports before we ever made it to Ali and Bill Russell and Tommy Smith and John Carlos, you know, they paved the way just by showing up and saying, we're here now and you can't get rid of us no matter what. So that I felt was a very important part of how to tell this story, tells how we got from where things were then to where things are now.
I'm talking with David Steele, a sports journalist, a veteran sports journalist of 30 plus years, and an author. We're talking about his most recent book, It Was Always a Choice, Picking Up the Baton of Athlete Activism. And in the chapter where you talk about the Star Spangled Resistance chapter, I don't think, you know, I didn't remember that Jackie Robinson had a protest to the anthem. And that was fascinating to me to read that. And I also know that there's a Jackie Robinson to a point that we all know about, and then there's a Jackie Robinson that we didn't really know about when he was kind of standing up saying, this is some BS, right? That's not the Jackie Robinson that we often read and hear about unless you look for that information, right? So that was really fascinating to me to read about his reflection on, you know, capping the end of his the 1947 season. Like that was really interesting. You talk about from Rose Robinson to the bubble, which was the bubble in the NBA bubble, where we saw the players, you know, so much happening. We saw Milwaukee Bucks say, yeah, no, we're not playing today. But talk a little bit about this Star Spangled Resistance chapter, because there's so much to unpack there.
There really was, because obviously, again, if we just sort of focus where we are in this struggle right now to Colin Kaepernick and what he did 5 or 6 years ago and the reaction to it, and the people who believe that the flag and the national anthem are something sacred and untouchable and are never to be used in a way to draw out the issues with the country that many segments of this population have. You know, a lot of people thought that he was, again, being sacrilegious and being ahistorical, when in fact it's very obvious the biggest political protest in the history of sports on this planet was Tommy Smith and John Carlos at the Olympics. But there was also a lot of precedence to that as well. Rose Robinson, it was really kind of a joy to learn about her in the early days of the of what Colin Kaepernick was doing. The fact that she was a great track and field athlete who refused to stand during the national anthem at the Pan American Games in 1959. You see the stories of Jackie Robinson saying, later in life, years after he had played his career and after he had sort of, people sort of painted this picture of him as, almost the anti-radical black athlete, the anti-Ali, the anti-Tommy Smith, and certainly even the anti-Colin Kaepernick. And he said, no, this flag does not represent for me what you believe it represents for you. This is what it's supposed to represent for me, and it very clearly doesn't. And if I had to do it all over again, I would not stand for the national anthem. I would not salute that flag. You see reference to, again, as you mentioned, Jack Johnson. He did not want to fight when he was fighting overseas after being exiled overseas by this country. He did not want to fight wearing the U.S. colors on his trunks. He would rather have represented France. He was wearing trunks with the colors of France, which technically are the same colors, but still, I mean, people understand what the difference is when you're fighting under the banner of one country as opposed to the one that you were born and raised in, but which clearly is stated that you don't want to be represented by that country. And when people understand, again, how they have a platform, and that there are ways that they could use that platform, and that the national anthem before games and the flag being raised and the military color guard coming out and the military flyover overhead, when that can be used as an opportunity to make a statement that you want to make on behalf of a group much bigger than yourself, again, they feel obligated and compelled to do it. And again, others who fight back against that are only fighting for the status quo.
Right. Let me see. Did I lose you? Oh, there you go.
I'm back.
Okay. Yeah, it's that whole thing called technology. You mentioned Rose Robinson, and when I read that she had been arrested, right? They arrested her and they wanted to call it, like, I think tax evasion, and for a debt of $386 or $86. I mean. Yes. That's
not $386,000. No, $386.
$386 was the debt, and because she was arrested on tax evasion, she refused to pay on principal, saying she didn't want her taxes going to this violence at home and abroad. These wars, and so there's a lot. So that was in the Pan Am Games, and then of course those 1960 games is where we know about Cassius Clay and Wilma Rudolph, which she would have more than likely have been on that same team with Wilma Rudolph, right? And Oscar Robinson, among others, where they really entered this, as you put it, international consciousness. So, this resistance did not start with Colin Kaepernick. I don't know if that's what made him decide that was the route. And as you said, he really didn't start by kneeling. He started by sitting, which many people forget. And he talked with a service veteran who said, that's what's disrespectful if you sit. It's better for you to kneel. And that's why he started taking a knee. You give a lot of credit to the WNBA, calling them the Justice League. And they were very active in the summer of 2020 following all of the shootings, unfortunately, it wasn't just George Floyd. George Floyd is the big one that I think, because we were all kind of in the house watching TV, became like, oh my goodness. But it was the beginning of so many others. I mean, the continuation of so many others, and they really took a stand.
Right, and that's why, you know, the more I was trying to shape this, the more I realized that I just, it wouldn't be fair to them, and by them I mean the individual players, the athletes, again, who had choices to make. You know, I could not underplay them. I couldn't give them short shrift. And it's interesting because what they did was kind of, again, bookended by really horrific shootings. I mean, it's sort of what has framed Colin Kaepernick's visibility. He started out with, protesting against the shootings of Orlando Castile and Alton Sterling. That's the exact same place where the WNBA players began to make the choice to take the stand that they did. That they even, just because, you know, they were in mid-season and Colin Kaepernick hadn't even reported training camp yet, but there have been a lot of chatter back and forth between professional athletes who were very conscious of what was going on. But because the WNBA was playing at the time, they said, we have to do this now. You know, our window is right now. And so within days of those shootings happening, they jumped right into the fray, and they started catching the backlash that Colin Kaepernick began to catch like 3 or 4 months later. And to their eternal credit, they kept it up. They collectively made sure, and to be very clear, black and white players unhesitatingly, joined together on this. They all lent their voices to it, and they were doing it not only before all the other sports and other athletes did. They were doing it while other athletes were making statements about why they wouldn't. I mean, they were talking, Colin Kaepernick's fellow NFL players were talking about why they weren't going to do what he did. Baseball players were completely silent. The NBA, there was a handful here and there. We've seen a lot of, I can't breathe shirts and things like that. But they did not really begin to take collective action until 4 years later, like you said, during the bubble, during the summer of George Floyd and all the protests. But for those 4 years in between, they weren't nearly as vocal as Colin Kaepernick was. But for that entire time, the WNBA players were, and they have continued to be. And they've done it even when their own league was trying to stop it.
Right. So, and when one of their own owners, they were largely responsible for her losing her seat in Georgia. They kind of protested against one of the team owners, and so it was women. That's all I can say. That's what we do.
Say that out loud one more time.
I know, right? Women, we carry the water for so much, and hold space for people to be able to come along, I guess, at their own time. You talk about you also talk in the book about allies, and you talk about a Greg Popovich, and you talk about Chris Long and Peter Norman. How important do you think that has been? And they have consistently been that. It hasn't just been one time. They have consistently lent their voices and stood in this space and said, this is some BS. This is not okay.
Yeah, I think that every black athlete and every athlete of any color who has said that I have to go out there and speak out and take the risk, they've always known that it would make so much more of an impact, and that they could really lead to considerable, possibly permanent change. They've got to have their white co-workers, colleagues, teammates, and other supporters alongside of them. And for the most part, they've had some. They haven't had it collectively. I think we all know very well how widespread the resistance to that has been. Things that people in power and the people who aren't in power, but who try to cling to power and cling to the status quo, they're going to push back really hard. But all these movements would never push forward without white allies. So we all saw that Tommy Smith and John Carlos had Peter Norman from Australia standing on the podium with them, sharing their message and wearing an Olympic Project for Human Rights skin on his lapel while the anthem was being played and while Tommy and John had their fists raised. During the Colin Kaepernick protests, when NFL players were raising their fists or taking a knee, there were players like Chris Long who stood by them and raised their fist as well and always had their back. And I made sure to include it, and I was really kind of fortunate to be there at the time when the Eagles players, after they, after they won the Super Bowl, collectively saying, because Donald Trump is this way and that way, we are not going to go to the White House. We're not going to disrespect our teammates like Malcolm Jenkins and these guys by going in by offering ourselves up to that. And that was a white locker room and a white coaching staff and white ownership and white management who stood behind their backs. They didn't isolate those black players. They said we're collectively not going to go. And you compare that to some of the baseball teams that went to the White House, and only the white players would go, and the black and Latino players stayed home. So that's where you see why it's important. And again, the WNBA example as well. Obviously, you see Sue Bird and Brianna Stewart and players of that caliber running around with Vote Warnock shirts, at games, and linking arms with their teammates and taking a knee. That's when and they did it without hesitation. And
without hesitation, right?
Movement would not be where it is without finding those players. And again, in the NBA, Steve Kerr, never being quiet about it. Greg Popovich, never being quiet. Stan Van Gundy, never being quiet about it. While others, would find a reason to stay away from it, keep it at arm's length, and to never challenge anybody, never put themselves at risk.
I'm talking with David Steele. We're talking about his latest book. It's titled "It Was Always a Choice: Picking Up the Baton of Athlete Activism." They're great stories, and we're just kind of going through some of them in the book. I think you should get the book and read it to really get to see how all of these panels are kind of weaved together. And we obviously couldn't. We have to talk about the chapter where you talk about the people who dropped the baton. Right, because as you said, that also was a choice. You said how OJ, Michael, and Tiger dropped the baton. If you saw the docuseries, The Last Dance, Michael kind of talked about when he had an opportunity to support, and he was like, "Yeah, no, I'm not doing that. I'm good over here." But I would argue that people like them, people like Michael Jordan and Tiger Woods and OJ before his fall, should have had the agency and the space to be able to stand up if it's what they believe, because what's going to happen to them, right? They're the people who could have had agency and they chose not to.
Yeah, they came along at a unique time in the history of all the things that we're talking about, in the history of sports and the history of social activism and protest. So much of what we talk about, and we do it to this day. We compare what the athletes do now with what they did in the '60s and what they did, back when Jackie Robinson and Jesse Owens and those guys, and we go back as far as we want. The guys who came, the great athletes who came out of that era, who saw the fight that the Bill Russells and Jim Browns and all those people fought, and who were sort of freed up and liberated by what they did. And I want to include Hank Aaron in that, because we all know how outspoken he was about what he had gone through. We see Frank Robinson always talked about, Kurt Flood, and those types. We see the athletes who were able to go out there and be the real, true global icons that all the others before them had never had the opportunity to do. OJ was the biggest face, the biggest name in sports for so many years. Michael was even bigger than that. And Tiger eclipsed both of them put together. Right. And yet, between them, with everything that they had and everything the visibility, all the doors that they opened up and all the visibility and power that they had. I mean, just the sneaker sales that Michael had, and
just the resources and I call them the opportunities.
Yeah.
They had a lot of opportunities to make a state, have a voice, have a position, take a stand, really to make a difference. And their active choice was to not accept the baton.
Right. Yeah, and that was part of again, when we were bouncing around ideas, is that we wanted to sort of emphasize the passing of the baton as an image that would sort of represent what the book was about. These guys just ran away from it. They wanted no part of it. They just didn't. And we talk a lot about what could have been and what it would have been like. And sometimes it really hurts to think about consciously where things might be right now if those athletes had taken full advantage of what they did. Even if they did what LeBron did. I mean, LeBron hasn't done everything, but he's done a pretty decent amount of stuff. And he's sort of on the same scale as Michael and Tiger and those guys. But when you think about who Michael Jordan was, and there are people out right here, right now, who are too young to remember how big Michael was. Yeah. But we know we were there. The world revolved around Michael Jordan during all those years. And
I mean, he saved Nike almost single-handedly and propelled them to the height to where they are. It is the shoe, right? It still is the shoe, and a lot of it had to do what Michael Jordan brought. And some might say, well, Kim, David, it's kind of unfair to put all of that on their shoulders. And so I am not saying, and your book does not say that the things that happened that continued to happen were their fault. But I am saying that they had an opportunity and they actively chose not to participate. I think that's fair, and I think that's historically accurate, and history will judge them that way. You mentioned LeBron. We can't help but remember the night at the ESPYs when the four of them, LeBron, Chris Paul,
Dwayne Wade and Carmelo Anthony.
Dwayne Wade and Carmelo Anthony, the group, when they made their statement, and probably gave I don't know if it gave license to others to say, oh, I can do this, but I think it does make a difference when people that are, it's one thing to say about what somebody did before and what Kareem did before, even if you weren't here yet, but the people who are in it right now are saying this is not okay. I think that was huge.
It was, and again, it brings everything that has come before us back to the present, and it was a reminder to everybody that these guys, those players, those athletes in that sport on that stage had, in a sense, arrived, but they were making it very clear that no, we have not arrived, and we are willing to take it upon ourselves to make this change, to push people toward this change, and we're fine with being the leaders toward changing everything. And and I think one of the things that I wanted to portray in this book the most, that it's not as much as hard as it might be on OJ and Michael and Tiger. It is a really difficult decision to make, to put yourself out there like that, especially when so much is at stake. I mean, we all know what LeBron's upbringing was like, and Dwayne Wade and Carmelo. I mean, he was right here in Baltimore, near where I am right now. These guys and most of the black athletes in this sport, that's how they come up. We know even about Michael, who's in a fairly middle class upbringing and everything. We know that it was a difficult, for him to be black in North Carolina, growing up in the 1960s. So, and they know that once you get there, you want to stay there. You know that you have an opportunity to change your life, others' lives, your family's lives, things like that. And you understand why, there's so much to lose. There's backlash, there's hatred. People are going to literally try, they're going to threaten to kill you. They're going to literally try to kill you. You're going to live under this cloud for the rest of your life. It's a dangerous undertaking. And we need to recognize that when the people decide to make that choice anyway.
Like a Naomi, a tennis player, Naomi Osaka, and Coco Gauff, who have been very, out front. And I think about, while she may not have made public statements about it in her playing day, but Zena Garrison had an opportunity to go play at Sun City, but apartheid was still in place. And she turned down a lot of money because she knew that was not the thing to do. She had a great relationship with Arthur Ashe, and he's like, there's no way you can do that. And she's like, absolutely. I mean, I think it was $1 million back then, and you're talking the 80s. You know, $1 million is still good money today, but it's really a lot of money in the 80s. And to say, nope, I'm not going to go play there because what's happening there is not okay. But to have that kind of mentorship from an Arthur Ashe, right, and Althea Gibson, but really from Arthur. And so it's ongoing work, and I'm glad that we circle back to that. It is not an easy choice, right? It's not easy choices when you do what you do and write stories that maybe people would rather not see, weave together. And when we show up, because oftentimes us just showing up, as you said in one of the chapters, is actually an act of protest. So, you know, congratulations to you, and just thank you for standing in the space and being willing to have the conversations that so many others won't have. And I mean, I know that where books go these days that's a whole nother story. I mean, you know, I live in Texas. This is a book that athletes should read. I think all athletes should read it. I think the union should say, we're going to get these books for our rookies. I just think that these are the conversations, the stories that people need to understand, because the history is important.
No, I very much appreciate that. And, you know, I would not be able to do the things that I've had an opportunity to do without having you and so many others, you know, be present all those years, because you know how lonely it was and how isolating it was. And you remember all the times when, you know, we'd run into each other at the finals, all-star games, things like that. You know, I still experience it. I walk into a clubhouse or a locker room or a press box, and it's just a sprinkling of us there. And yet, you know that we're all in that same struggle. So you're drawn toward all of them. And, you know, we end up supporting each other. And, you know, we've known each other for so long. And you've given me an opportunity to talk about this right here. And I'm going to be eternally grateful for that, because without that kind of support, I would not be able to have the courage to put together, to do the kind of work that I'm doing and try to put together these kind of books. So, you know, there are not many of us, and we make choices ourselves that are not easy ones. And
yeah,
really reap the benefits.
You know, and I think it's important. I was talking to having after church the other day, having brunch with some friends, and they said, one of my friends is like, I'm waiting for the book. I'm like, which book is it? She goes, you have all these stories about your journey. And I'm like, yeah, but, and so I am, you know, I said, I have like 4 books in my head, but she said, I think that's the one that you have to write first. And because, you know, after all the years and all the experience and all the platforms, it is still a struggle, right? Because when I show up, it's still a protest. And I don't know that people realize that. There are people that come to this new because of what social media has allowed and the internet has opened up and streaming. But there's still something to be said for, you know, coming through it the long way and those lessons and learning it that way. That contemporaries just don't really understand, and that's not a knock on them, or it's not to say that they don't deserve to be in the room, but you can't forget about the journey, because it's impactful.
It is. It really is. And, you know, the more voices we have there, the better. The more faces we have, the better. You know, whatever we can do to tell them to keep it alive. And again, you know, this is what happened with all the athletes. I mean, when athletes decide to take a knee or to raise a fist or to step up and speak out and not just stick to the status quo, they were sort of beckoning other people to come along with me, and they were beckoning the kids who were watching them and hoping that their kids, or maybe even their kids' kids, would somehow be awakened and somehow be alerted to the possibilities. You know, so, you know, who would have imagined? I'm sure that when Tommy Smith and John Carlos were down there on that stand, they were thinking, hey, maybe 50 years from now, some NFL player will be doing this. Wouldn't that be something? Maybe he'll even be a quarterback. And here we are.
We are. Absolutely. David, I appreciate your time. Thank you for sending me the book. It's always a choice, picking up the baton, athlete activism. I'm going to put the link in all the comments so people will know where they can get it. But keep up the great work. We have to do this more frequently. We always say that. But thank you for sharing some time and just kind of walking us through some of the great stories in the book. But you can't really get them all unless you read the book, right? There's only so much we can do here. You got to read the book and you won't be sorry. If you got young kids who are athletes, get them the book for Christmas, right? It's a great time. So thank you, and we will talk soon, my friend.
Thank you so much for having me on. You have a great rest of the week, and see if you can get through this week with with your football team down there. Good luck with that.
Oh my gosh! Look, before you go, I just have to ask you this. You know, I you know, Lovie Smith has been around a long time, and actually the AP reporter said yesterday after the usual Monday press conference, because, you know, reporters, many of whom are new to this space, and a couple who are new to the market, and she said, listen, Lovie Smith has always been one of the nicest people. He is a gentleman. And she's like, y'all didn't cover Bill O'Brien, which is what I said a couple weeks ago. Don't talk to me about condescending if you didn't cover Bill O'Brien. He was, what Lovie is like, you know, I don't know, like, I don't want to say Santa Claus because you may not like Santa Claus, but he's like the person that you want to, you know, take your kids to see after school compared to what we dealt with the Bill O'Brien. But I believe, and I also have some, you know, the whole sources say thing, that oftentimes the way that he shows up at the podium is because that is what upper management wants. That is the Patriots way. It's not just not giving information, it's being rough. I mean, it's being tough about it. And when you answer to somebody else, it's very difficult to not show up the way that they are saying you have to show up. And that's really more of what happened to David Culley than the fact that the team lost, because he won more games than they're winning now. Anyway, I just wanted your thoughts from the outside when you see the narrative that kind of being created about a guy that you've seen over your career, like a Lovie Smith.
Yeah, and you know, I'm so glad you said that, because, you know, so much, you know, and I don't want to be the guy like, oh, these kids today, you know, but, you know, the way that everything is sort of, you know, reduced to sound bites and, you know, hot takes and bite-sized little chunks of data that have no context or correlation. You know, I mean, but Lovie Smith has a history in this league. You know, he's earned a lot of credibility. We all know the kind of person that he is, the way that he comports himself, and the way that he, you know, conducts himself. You know, the contrast is obvious there for anybody like you who's been there for a while and has experienced Bill Belichick in the Patriot way, and the little mini pseudo wannabe Bill Belichicks of the world, you know, who splinter off into different places and try to bring that same, you know, persona, and it fails miserably like Bill O'Brien did. And when you understand the shenanigans, people who are perceptive have seen the front office mess that the Texans have been. And I think that, I mean, you know, I think maybe there are a lot of people who aren't aware that, you know, when Lovie took that job, everyone just sort of took their breath in and just said, man, he deserves better than to be in the middle of something like this. You know, these kind of people, the way that they, you know, conducted themselves over the last several years. And, you know, people are trying to be salty about the way that he, you know, is treating, and the fact that like you said, and I'm so glad you said it, he's been the one who's been paraded out there week after week after week, when a whole lot of other faces should be the ones that should be speaking on behalf of that organization and facing the music and facing the consequences the way that Lovie Smith has been every single week. So, you know, but you're right. You know, they didn't treat David Culley with any more respect either. So, you know, it's infuriating, and you just kind of have to bite your tongue sometimes about the way they sort of handle him, and you know that Lovie deserves better than what he's getting in a lot of cases.
Well, David, with that, I'm going to let you go. I've got to talk a little football before I get out of here, but we will talk soon, my friend. Keep up the great work, and thank you for sharing your book and just your voice. And again, thanks for, you know, holding space to talk about this. And this isn't your first foray into talking about activism, and so I appreciate the fact that you're committed to the work, and you continue to do it. I can't wait to see what's next.
I kid you. Well, thanks again for having me on. You're right. When you do this more often, and hey, I'm ready to talk whenever you're ready to listen. So,
all right, David
thanks.
Steele. Thank you, my friend.
Take care.
All right, that's David Steele, and he is the author of "It's Always a Choice: Picking Up the Baton of Athlete Activism." I'm going to put the link in the comments so that you can get it. Seriously, it's history, and it's an easy read. It's not hard to read. They're great stories, and you'd be doing yourself a disservice if you don't explore it. But before I get out of here, I do have to talk a little bit about those Houston Texans. Right, they are. Sean Watson in his first game back. It's going to be a circus, right? You're going to have national media, local media. And so what I want to say when I talk about the Patriots way, if you guys will remember, those of you who are Houston Texans fans, I know many people watch from different parts of the country. The Texans have tried for quite some time to get a Nick Caserio, right? They wanted him here. They so much of what the Patriots have done, they've brought into the organization. And so I just want to remind people, fans, that the Patriots way wasn't really even just about what they did on the field. It is a way of doing, a way of operating. And so while people were hard on Lovie Smith, I feel like Nick Caserio has gotten an unnecessary pass, and I think that's unfortunate. I think that he should bear more of the, hey, good morning, Carolyn, thank you for being a part of the show. And so that's unfortunate, and I think it is, it's not warranted. Like, he should bear more of the brunt of the conversation about what's happening with this team, right? So let me let you hear a little bit from Lovie Smith before I get out of here today. And before I go to that, I would be remiss if I did not say that the world champion Houston Astros have made a major signing. They have signed Abreu, and I was not at the press conference because it happened right before my show. But the announcement was made on yesterday evening. This morning at 10 a.m. They were introducing him to the market. They signed free agent first baseman Jose Abreu. The terms were, while the Astros didn't release it, the reported terms are for 3 years, $58 million. And so Abreu and owner Jim Crane were available this morning. He's 35 years old, Abreu is. He's a former American League MVP. He's a three-time All-Star, a three-time Silver Slugger. He spent his entire 9-year Major League career with the Chicago White Sox. For his career, he's hit 292 with 243 home runs, 863 RBI, 697 runs, and an 860 OPS. Listen, since he's led the majors in 2014, he leads the American League in total bases with 2,509. So in short, he's pretty good. And that's a heck of a bat to add to this already lethal Houston Astros lineup. So while people were concerned about, oh my gosh, they don't have a general manager right now, clearly work is still happening. Adding that bat to the lineup is exciting. I know fans love Yuli Gurriel, and you're like, what's that mean for Yuli? Yuli may have a role, but I think it's exciting that they've signed Jose Abreu. And yeah, it is, you know, it's a lot. So, yeah, you're right, Kevin. They're not going to press Caserio. Kevin says, you think those good old boys going to press Caserio? They are not. And I guess what's unfortunate for me is the people who have what I call this revisionist history. And I feel like this, and I've said it to some of them, and I think the radio guys are the worst offenders of it. When David Culley was here last year, they mocked him. They didn't like the way he showed up at the podium. But David Culley was he's a very different person than Lovie. He was nice. He was, on Friday, when we sat around kind of for the little fireside chat, he ate their treats. Lovie didn't eat their treats. Lovie's like, I don't eat like that. I'm healthier. And so, you know, my mother was diabetic and blind. So no, I don't eat that. That's too much sugar. So I'm just going to say it. It's almost as though when David Culley shows up and now Lovey shows up, if those men don't show up in the way that this local media thinks they should, they take shots at them, and that's problematic for me, right? That's problematic for me. I don't think that's my place. I heard people in the media last year question David Culley's manhood because of, he just seems like that's not the presence you want at the podium. I hear those same guys on the radio saying, man, it's nothing Lovey's doing, it's just silly. I would venture to say that, and I say this not just because it's my great thought, it is also because I do have sources as well, was really kind of the undoing of David Culley, because he was not brash and harsh at the podium, and that management, Caserio, and at the time used to be, thought he maybe gave away too much, right? So this exterior that you're getting from Lovie Smith, Caserio's not going to tell you that he didn't want it to be released, that they'd made a decision to go with Kyle Allen. It's not true that they split reps. Kyle Allen, it was leaked on Wednesday that he was going to be the starter. But when you tell Kyle Allen, look, we can't say that, this is what you say. I mean, it's a facade and it's a mess. And I think you got to call it, And Kim says about Abreu, he's missed 14 games, 18 games in 4 years, minimum, especially when you consider they play 162 regular season games, right? That's nothing. And so adding Abreu, it keeps this even without him, this Astros team is going to be back in the hunt next year, right? Back in the hunt next year for another title. We'll see what happens with Michael Brantley in terms of how he recovers and what happens with him. We'll see what happens with Yuli. Will they have him to come in as like a pinch hitter? But they're trying to win over there. They're trying to win. So, last night the Houston Rockets lost in Denver after winning 2 in a row for the first time all season. They play in Denver again tomorrow night on Wednesday night. I've liked some of the things I've seen from that young team, that rebuilding team, and that organization. Differences in the Texans and the Rockets. The Rockets actually do have talent. The Texans have a talent deficit, and so if you don't admit that or accept that, you're not being realistic. Hey, Bobby says Lovey is controlling his own narrative. He's controlling it the best he can. If you followed, I've done this job long enough and this work long enough to have seen Lovey's teams over the years. And so I've said this over and over again. For those who think that, Davis Mills was a Lovie Smith kind of guy, you don't just go back and look at his work and follow his teams. And don't tell me that because it was so long ago that he won in Chicago, he doesn't know football. I just don't believe that. But what's he working with, right? I'll wait. But this week we know that Deshaun Watson is coming back to town. It'll be his first time playing for another team, and he was activated from his suspension. He's been practicing. His first game will be this Sunday against his former team, the Texans. Talk about a circus at the NFL setup. It is what it is. And this is Lovey really yesterday. He did talk. He was, of course, asked about Watson. And here's him talking about facing Deshaun this weekend.
No, I mean, he hadn't played in a long period of time, but he's a heck of a football player. I know that. And I assume playing quarterback is a lot like riding a bike. It comes back to you fairly quick. I know he's been practicing with them. They've been playing good football. Adding Deshaun, of course, will make them that much better. But they beat a good Tampa team yesterday. They played good football throughout. Balanced attack offensively. Have a running game, excellent running backs. Superstars on the defensive side of the ball. They'll be a big test for us.
Ask about, although Deshaun was technically a part of the team last year, he wasn't really a part of the team, as you'll remember, and it was Lovey's first year with the team, and so they weren't around him a lot. He talked more about Deshaun Watson and him coming back to play the Texans this weekend.
you're right, it's a little bit different last year. Deshaun was in the building a little bit, but we didn't have a whole lot of interaction with him. But that is in the past. Change error codes, all that. We're just kind of now it's just about a great quarterback coming into town that we need to get ready for, and with a history, with our franchise. I think it's just about that. As you start watching the video of them as a football team, you kind of move past that. And again, did I tell you we're playing a whole lot of young guys? They don't know a whole lot about our past and what we've done. They're just trying to get better and help us, get another win.
Is this just another example of you guys looking forward and not looking to the past and just trying to move on from kind of everything? Yeah,
I think this will probably be the final piece to that story a little bit, where Sean's back, he's playing football, and the way things go, his first game would be back down here. What a great opportunity for us too. Again, we haven't played our best ball, and a lot of people will be watching this game, and hopefully we put, best effort we've had all year.
So that was Lovie Smith yesterday talking about facing Deshaun Watson. We know that that's going to be the huge part of the conversation all week. Deshaun's first game back. The Texans continue to struggle. I did ask Lovie yesterday about these slow starts, right? They've been outscored 50-0 in the past 2 games in the first half. What do you do about that? And this is Lovie talking about their slow starts. What do you do? You talked about the slow starts, in the first half especially. What do you do this week?
Well, the last couple, Kim, they've been really slow. What do? We just, you go back, you watch what happened, the first play, we missed a block. Missed one block, put you on your heels. We got the third down, one guy kind of missed another block and give us a chance. You just keep working on it, and you can't wait for that next game to get here. And for us, this is a big game. We get another chance to prove that we can start fast. And hopefully that'll be the case this week.
So yesterday, Brian Barefield, Sarge asked Lovie about Brandon Cook's comments, and so here is that, after the game, Brandon said that the team just, I guess, wasn't prepared, wasn't ready. Here's that from there. Here's Lovie responding to that from yesterday.
All right, we talked on yesterday. After the game, Brandon. We talked on yesterday. After the game, Brandon Cook said that made reference to not being the team wasn't prepared offensively from the start. Where does that type of comment stem from?
You got to talk to Brandon about that. Prepared. Well, the way we didn't play well. So to say we were ready to play, to me, it's pretty simple. How do you start out? Did you play well to start off? You're ready to play. If you don't, you're not ready. So if a guy like Brandon is saying that, one of our leaders of our football team, we weren't. That definitely wasn't the plan. And hopefully this week, that happened last week, hopefully this week we'll be better prepared, better ready to play against a good Cleveland team.
That's Lovie Smith on yesterday. It is going to be an interesting week. And, of course, Deshaun Watson will make his debut as a Cleveland Brown this weekend against the Houston Texans. I don't even know in terms of what you expect from this team. They're not – there's a talent deficit, right? And I get that everybody gets paid to do a job, but there's a talent deficit. And so you've got to – be honest about it. This is not a very good football team. The Houston Texans are not. Bobby says Caserio is controlling and still trying to mold an identity for the Texans. He's wandering in the wilderness. He is wandering in the wilderness, and he's not being held accountable for it. And this is the team he constructed, and it's the people like, oh, well, they're not really trying to tank. I don't think coaches tank. I think the management's tank. And if you tell me this is what we have, if you send me in the season with Davis Mills and Kyle Allen and Jeff Driscoll, then you're telling me you're going to tank, right? There's no reason, and I said this earlier, I say it often, this, as important as a quarterback position is, you should get one every year, right? Until you got the franchise quarterback, and then you should still probably get one because you got to have somebody in case the franchise quarterback gets hurt. The quarterback position is way too important to sit back and say, well, we're just going to see how good Davis Mills is. If you believe that, yeah, I got some stuff to sell you somewhere. I don't know where, but let me just think of something. Good morning, Charles. Drayden, welcome. I appreciate that. Kevin says Houston Radiohead's he's not real fond of it. I'm totally clueless to what they want to hear from the head coach. The man is human, of course, and he's in charge of football. He's frustrated with his team results. Absolutely. Do you think he wants to trot out and have a team that can't, so we make the change at quarterback, and we're still turning the ball over, right? We can't get any kind of protection up front. Quarterbacks just aren't very good. People were clamoring, media, fans that are kind of lay about me, and I don't really blame fans because that's what fans do, but I feel like people in our industry who do this work should come to it differently, and so I'm just going to say this. I'm really bothered by the fact that and it's not even just the radio people that are white, although that's mostly what they are, want to determine how a black man should show up and speak. That's a problem for me, and that's what happens. It did it with David Culley. He was the antithesis in terms of his demeanor of Lovie Smith, and that wasn't okay. And now there's Lovie, and that's not okay. And now they're talking about they're actively on the radio talking about who should replace him. I was like, what level of disrespect? And I just think some of what they say, they are clueless, Kevin. I think much of what they say is not warranted and is not rooted in real good information. They sit behind their microphones. They don't really show up. They're there on game day, and there's no question the product sucks, right? Let's be clear. But if you're not heated about Caserio and what Cal has allowed to happen to this team, then miss me on that rage about Lovey, and y'all want him every week to say, I'm getting rid of Pep Hamilton. Vince Lombardi couldn't do anything with this team. Let me just saying, right? Their issues are beyond coaching, but that's a whole nother show. Listen, I've gone over. I appreciate you guys sticking around. The book is It Was Always a Choice, Picking Up the Baton of Athlete Activism. I'm going to put the information in the chat. It's a great book. David's a friend. He wrote Silent Gesture with Tommy Smith and Giancarlo's. He has been true to this work, and I think it's just there were things that I didn't know that I had forgotten about, and it's just a great book. If you've got young athletes in your life, get them this book, and get it yourself. I mean, it's not like it's just a kid's book. It's a book of historical. It's a great book about stories and history. And it was always a choice, right? It's been a choice for a very long time. And I love when the one chapter when he says, sometimes when you're black and you show up, that in itself is a protest. I feel like I'm protesting all the time. So listen, have a great week. Thank you guys for being a part of the Chalk Talk Tribe. Be sure that you share this work, that you share this show with your online community. And remember, today's show is brought to you by the World Youth Foundation. We're partnered with them to do some work around the African American Male Wellness Agency walk. It's going to be in April of 2023. But more importantly, along the way, we're going to provide a space to have conversations with black men and about things that can be helpful for black men. And when I heard this, there's a McKinsey report that I'm not going to bore you guys with, but when it talks about, on average, how black men die 12 years earlier than their white counterparts due to preventable diseases, that is not okay with me. And so how can I help? So if it's about creating conversations, about raising awareness about these health disparities and opportunities for black men to cut this 12 years down, and to get the screenings and the help that they need. It's not even just about physical health, it's about mental health and financial health. I want to be an ally and help have the conversation. So thank you to the World Youth Foundation for being a sponsor of this work, and we're going to have many more conversations about that. I'm actually headed to the monthly meeting about this work and this walk right now. So thank you for being a part of Chalk Talk. Remember to support I Love Jinka, ilovejinka.com, and in your HEB stores. When you go in the store, you don't see it, ask for the store manager and just say, hey, I would like for you guys to have this here regularly. Can you have it in your warehouse? That is the only way the company will be able to keep it in stock and to be able to scale it so it's always there when you need it. And don't forget about Kimmy Treats. Go get your vegan popcorn and your body butter at kimmytreats.com. All right, make it a great week. I will see you guys next week. Remember, do something kind for yourself and something kind for somebody else. See you next time.